welcome the use of the Welsh language at our meetings, but today I've had no request for people to speak in Welsh, so the meeting will be conducted in English only. Please, can members refrain from using the chat function and instead use the raised hand icon to indicate when you want to speak. Can I remind you that as per statutory guidance made under Section 4 of the Local Government Wales Measure 2011 and our formally adopted hybrid meeting policy, any member attending a meeting remotely must be able to be seen and heard by members and officers who are attending the meeting, as well as by members of the public, those viewing the meeting. And so, can I ask that you all please use your cameras for the duration of this meeting. Can I also remind you to keep your microphones muted when you're not talking. Please do not interrupt discussions until you have notified of your intention to speak and have been invited to do so. We now move on to our agenda. Jade, do we have any apologies, please?
Thanks, Chair. I have apologies from Councillor Bonera and Councillor David Williams.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest under item 2? No? Okay. Thank you.
Can I come in,
yes.
Chair? Just T. Dolan is mentioned in my ward, so I just wanted to declare that as an interest. Right.
Thank you, Steve. We'll move on to agenda item 3, the minutes of the meeting of the 9th of November. Members, a reminder that these are the minutes of the meeting where we did scrutinise the proposed new model for integrated reablement. Can you state whether you have anything to raise in relation to these minutes? If not, I will take them as read. We'll take them as read. Okay. Item 4 is our action sheet. Rebecca, can you run us through the action sheet, please?
Thank you, Chair. So just to quickly run members through the action sheet, you'll see the first action listed is the recommendations from the last meeting. I have just received those, so I will circulate those following the meeting. The next 2 updates, I emailed you that additional information last week. So it's just the final action listed on there that I'm still waiting for that information, but I will get that to you as soon as I do have it available. Thank you.
Okay. If everyone's happy, we'll move on to our agenda item 5, which is the front door to adult social care. Before we commence our discussions, I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome Councillor Daniels, who is the Executive Member of Adult Services and Housing, Dave Leach, our Strategic Director for Adults and Communities, and Helen Deacon, who is Project Manager. Also, Amanda Lewis from Glenavon, who is taking part as observations at this meeting. We welcome you all. Dave, or either of you, if you want to give us a brief overview to the report before we start our questioning.
Thank you, Chair. So the report before you today presents a proposed model for a new information, advice and assistance service. Essentially, it's a front door to adult social care. As I go through the discussion, I'll explain why we're using those terms interchangeably throughout the report. At the minute, one of the areas that you'll see in the report is a description of how we currently deliver services in information, advice and assistance. And that's very much aligned to our patch-based approach for delivering adult social care. Referrals will come into the patch, referrals will be considered within the patch, and information, advice and assistance will be given at that point. But members will be aware that we've done a lot of work over the last 12 months in strengthening our community offer and what the wellbeing offer is that our communities can provide, and also in strengthening the pathways and the flow through the adult social care system, particularly in relation to reablement that I know members scrutinised last time. So what we're looking to achieve here is to bring all of that wider work together so that we have a clearer, more defined and more effective front door for adult social care. And what that means in essence is that when an inquiry comes into the new system, it'll be triaged appropriately at that front door so that we can increase the quality and the amount of information, advice and assistance that people are getting at that point. And the aim of doing this is to make sure that we're giving the right care and support to people at the right time, because too often there's a risk that people will be pulled into more formal care and support plans if we don't get that information, advice and assistance right at the right time, at the start of that journey. So what you've been presented with within the report today is a summary of how that new information, advice and assistance service will operate, some of the risks and challenges of us implementing the new service, but also those key benefits as to why we think this service is going to improve outcomes for residents in Torfaen. And the key questions we're sort of posing to Scrutiny to really challenge and scrutinise on is how will that redesign of that front door deliver that more effective and efficient service? Have we got the rationale right? Is the rationale there and strong enough for us implementing that new service? And is the model set up in a way that will deliver those outcomes that we're looking to achieve?
Councillor Daniels, do you want to come in?
Yeah, sure. I'll give a quick introduction. I mean, I feel like Dave's probably encapsulated most of it, but I mean, looking at the report, you can see that the rationale, because we're on the rationale element of it, the rationale's a solid one. You know, a good proportion, 60% of inquiries that come through are for information, advice and assistance, and that's coming through to currently through to our patch managers often. That's not the right place for it. There is currently a very decent risk that we are over-prescribing the support that we give, where it is just information, advice and assistance that's needed. You can see that the demographics and the way we're headed are that we are heading for an older population, people living with longer with more complex conditions, and living at home with more complex conditions. So, you know, as written in the report, we're looking at potentially an additional £5 million added on top of our current adult services budget. So it's clear that we need to do things. I mean, we can do things better. So in terms of rationale, I mean, for me, it's one that's very much needed and has been needed. So I'm pleased that we're bringing it forward now.
Thank you, Councillor Daniels. We noticed that Claire DeLay from Blanavon has joined us, so welcome, Claire, to the meeting. Hope you'll find it useful. Okay.
Thank you.
So we will now start our questioning, if that's okay. The first question is from myself, and it says, why was a review of the front door identified as one of the 3 changes activities for this year?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so the starting point for this, as it is for all of the transformation programmes that we're doing within adult social care, is how do we improve outcomes for our residents? And to do that, we need to look at the entire system all the way through. So that system goes right from the point where someone first approaches the council, and indeed before that, which is why this committee scrutinises the community's agenda as well, right the way through to looking at how we engage with the health service, how we engage with hospital discharge, and how we broker care and support for those who do really require that brokered care and support. And that may be domiciliary care as much as it is care from our home providers. And as part of that, we've scrutinised every part of that journey. And there were 3 areas within it this year that we thought needed some work. So we've covered off already in a previous session the reablement journey. We've talked around the community wellbeing offer and strengthening that. And patch-based commissioning is another element that we're still working through at the minute. But all of that requires us to have flow through the system. So what it means is that the point at which somebody contacts us, we need to make sure that that person is going to exactly the place that they need to be going at that point in time. Because if we get that wrong, flow will break down somewhere in the system. So if somebody is going to the wrong place and then going on elsewhere in the system, that will mean that they're essentially receiving the wrong kind of support twice. They'll probably end up coming back into the patch team. It will increase the demands and workload on that patch team, which will delay their progression further through the system. So the front door is about how do we make sure that we're effectively managing and designing flow straight away. So of all the areas that we presented to you so far, this one is absolutely critical for making everything else that we've talked about join up and work effectively. And that was the rationale for including it as a change activity this year. Now, I'm sure there'll be other questions around the specifics on the rationale, so I won't dwell too much on that. But just one point to raise broadly is around us delivering those county plan objectives. This is around a preventative and communities-based approach. It's part of that same narrative that flows all the way through that county plan that the council has signed up to and is really delivering on. And that's around early identification and prevention, working with the community, and it's around supporting and promoting healthier lifestyles. That health agenda is very much driving what we do. So there's the outcomes focus for individuals, there's the flow and the practicalities, and then there's the county plan objectives.
Thank you, Dave. Councillor Daniels, do you want to add anything? Thank you for your answer, Dave. We'll now move on to question 2, which comes from Councillor Clarkson.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the report and how we're going to use the new system, the delivery of IAA through a patch base or the new front door system is going to heavily rely on the information and knowledge that the duty officer taking the calls has regarding what services are actually available and community activities that are in the patches. So the question is, with this being now a much wider area that they're going to be dealing with, how are we going to maintain the information to make sure this accurate and up to date on what is available as a community offer, especially from sort of community groups, third sector, that type of thing? And how is that information going to be kept up to date?
Yes, thanks, Councillor Clarkson. You've hit at the essence of what, again, is really important for making this system work. So this system doesn't just relate to adult social care and the individual social workers who are working within that. You're absolutely right. The critical part of this system is what we can do out in the community and how we can make people aware of what that offer is out in the community. At the minute, the patch-based approach does mean that social workers know some of the activity that's going on in their patch, but since COVID, it's become increasingly difficult for social workers to keep abreast of all of the changes that's happened within that community sector, even on a patch-based model, because there's always that balancing act, isn't there, between their core function around care and support and brokering that care and support, and that wider work to increase the knowledge of what's happening in the local area. So what this new approach will do is make sure that we've got at that front door a connection into the communities teams across the council, so that will be embedded within that front door. So those capacity builders that we've employed through the Shared Prosperity Fund, those community connectors that we support through the RIF funding, they will be the ones on the ground responsible for identifying and understanding what's happening, and they remain patch-based. So that will be their core role. And they will feed that into the front door so that the front door is up to speed with what's happening on a community level. So it takes away some of that requirement on social workers to know everything that's happening within their area. Now, some still will. Some will still look to do that as part of their own professional development, etc. But it does mean that we've got more eyes and ears on the ground understanding what's going on, because we all know since COVID how rapidly that community wellbeing offer changes. So you're absolutely right, that was critical in terms of our redesign.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Clarkson?
Yes, I think the questions that follow will expand on that, so that's great.
Yeah, anyone else? We move on to the next question. Okay, next question also comes from Councillor Clarkson. Okay, Linda.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. The community wellbeing offers continues to change rapidly, and this presents a challenge to the patch teams with the model of IAA. How do we define community wellbeing offer? It's quite a term that's got quite a wide sort of expanse, so it was felt it might be helpful if that was defined within the information, especially that going out to the public via our sort of website. And with it being a rapidly changing offer, it feeds into the first question as well. But it's if we can have a bit more information on that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's very difficult for us to define what that wellbeing offer is, because it changes very, very regularly. So what I mean when I talk around the community wellbeing offer is that full range of activity that communities or the third sector, so more structured support out in communities, provides that supports people with their overarching well-being. And the reason that's important in a social care context is we know a lot of the information, advice and assistance enquiries that we get relate to general support with day-to-day activities, not personal care. So a lot of those activities may be helping with shopping, helping access finance, helping with paperwork, helping prepare meals, a company, popping in for a conversation, activities that sort of stimulate the mind. All of that are the sort of enquiries that we receive when people come and speak to us around the provision of social care. Now, we know that the community provides that exceptionally well in Torfaen. Those services do exist and they are provided by individuals living out in our communities. So that's part of the reason why we're looking at the connectors and the capacity builders as the conduit for that community information back in, because we've tried many a time to have a website or a structured presence, and no sooner have you updated it, it becomes out of date. So that's why we're looking to channel that through individuals out on the ground who have that understanding. And we will be relying on our community working with us as well on this. That we will be relying on communities being willing to have those conversations with us around what they provide. Now, we're very fortunate in Torfaen that happens. Community groups do speak to us about what they're providing, and they do react and respond to the demands and the challenges in their particular areas as well. We are looking at a web presence, so members may be familiar with the Connect Torfaen platform, and we are looking at reforming that platform, making that more effective, but that certainly won't be a sort of holy grail as to all of the community wellbeing information put online in one place, because we know that that will become out of date very quickly. So it's as much around the connections that we're making at a local level as it is having a formal web presence. Does that answer the question?
It sort of does. It's quite complex, the complexity of the area, isn't it? The perception of the public of what they can approach for, and that sort of lower level of needs that can be met. So it's about trying to communicate that to the public and to all partners and organisations, so that we're all aware of the change that's coming.
Okay. Does anyone else want to come in on that? Dave, Helen, do you want to have any input? Okay, we'll move on to our next question, and we're moving on to the rationale for change, strategic context, and coming into Councillor Jane Watkins, please.
Thank you, Chair. It says in 3.9.6 that a list of different challenges that this is going to bring. One of them specifically says, do people know what the wellbeing offer is in their local area? How are we going to assess this, and how are we going to benchmark it to determine whether the new model is having a positive impact?
So, as part of the community wellbeing strategy that we'll be putting before members later this year, this committee's scrutinised that strategy twice. There was a whole piece of work done around what wellbeing might mean and how the strengths in each of our communities, done on a community council footprint, differs depending on which parts of that offer that we're looking at. So some of our communities have fantastic local services and local activity around supporting mental health. Others may have exceptional activity in supporting activities, so it might be lunch clubs, things like that. Some of them had some really innovative activities for intergenerational work, all things that would be part of that wider wellbeing offer within the local area. So what we've done in that strategy is essentially benchmarked where at a point in time the data says each of those individual communities is. And what I mean by the data is different measures that would show how are we in terms of access to services, how are we in terms of overall mental health, physical health, some of those key metrics. And what we'll be looking to track with the community wellbeing strategy is, have we put and worked with the community to make sure that we're collectively responding to that challenge? That's the first one. So what does the asset base look like within each community? So we'll track that. And then once we've done that, the question will be, have those indicators shifted? So where we've got that baseline data now, if we're confident that there's now real assets in that community that are tackling that particular problem, in 3 years' time, 5 years' time, have we seen an improvement that the data's showing us in that area? So we've got that tracking system in place through the community wellbeing strategy. This will fluctuate hugely as we go through, because we know we've all worked with community groups and we know that people are so passionate about the activity that they deliver, but people move on, and they move on to other activities, or clubs close, or people sadly pass away who run these groups. So that offer changes so rapidly, it may mean that we think there's a real asset and strength in a community, and that disappears overnight. And so we've got to work with the community to say, okay, how do we replace that? How do we make sure that that comes back? So we need to make sure that we've got that in place. So the data will go up and down a little bit, but what we're looking for is that clear trajectory that the assets in the community are making a difference to individuals.
Jane, do you want to, any supplementary?
Yes, please. So can I just confirm that, no, that sounds great. Obviously, that's something you've got to really look at closely. So you said you're going to track it, and then you mentioned 3 years and 5 years. So if you find that things are dropping off quicker than that, are you going to act, or is that the timescale you've given? We'll act after 3 years, and we'll look again after 5 years.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Tracking data is always dangerous because of those peaks and troughs, and particularly when you're looking at this space, external factors have such a big bearing on some of the data that we're looking at here, particularly that community provision. So we will be constantly monitoring the data. We'll be doing that probably annually. I wouldn't see us changing our approach for at least 3 years unless there's something dramatically happening in terms of the data at a community level, because it takes time not only to get those interventions in place, but then to see the impact of them. So I would see 3 years probably being the first sort of major review point. Having said that, if it's very evident from conversations on the ground that the approach isn't working, then we would look to review it sooner.
Dave, can I come in? The activities that are provided in some communities, some of these are based on funding, aren't they? And what happens with this if the funding ceases?
Yeah, there is always a risk of that, and this is one of the reasons, again, that we see such churn amongst our community sector, particularly the more structured parts of the sector, so the social enterprise, the formal third sector and voluntary sector activity, because that tends to be the part of that community approach that's more reliant on funding. This is why we need to track the assets that remain in a community, and we need to do that regularly, because say you have an activity that ceases, that may be devastating for that community, but it also creates an opportunity for a new group to come in, whether that's funded, not funded, whatever the situation may be, to fill that gap. And that new group may be able to secure different types of funding that perhaps the other one wasn't able to. So funding will always be a challenge in terms of us supporting the community activity. But we don't know how big of a challenge until we start to see what funding streams disappear and what's happening with that.
Thanks, Dave. Councillor Daniels, do you want to have anything to say?
It's really hard following Dave because he's so comprehensive in his replies, really. But the only thing that occurs to me is it does place a greater emphasis, a greater onus on us as a council to help maintain these community groups, because sustaining them is obviously crucial to in cold hard terms, stemming some of the harder, more expensive demand for us down the line, sort of thing, because the work that they do is hidden until it's not. So I think it just places a greater emphasis on us to make sure that there's that succession planning that in terms of people and in terms of grants. So yeah, that's the only thing I can think to add to Dave. Yeah, it's very, very difficult following Dave.
Thank you both. Anybody else have anything to say before we move on? The next question comes from Councillor Seaborn. It's question 5.
Thank you, Chair, and mine still relates to 3.9.6 in the report. And you've answered some of it, but I will ask the question anyway. Is the wellbeing offer strong enough in each of our communities? And are there areas where it could be strengthened? And will this be measured against the relevant demand within a community? And is demand need likely to differ across communities? That's a bit of a mouthful, but so is it strong enough? Is there areas we need to be strengthened? And is there different demand in each of our communities?
I'm not going to try and repeat that because I'll stumble over my words if I do, Councillor Seaborn, I'm sure. But you're absolutely right. There is different levels of demand in each of our communities. But each of our communities has a different asset base as well. We've got to be really, really careful here. This doesn't come across as big council saying to communities, you shall do this. communities generate their own strengths and their own activities. What we're looking to do here is provide more information and data to communities and support to say these are the challenges within your area that you may or may not be aware of. This isn't about dictating what happens to community groups, far from it. So whilst the challenges will differ, so will the strengths base of each of our communities. And that's why I say you may have a community that has a high requirement for, or a large problem with inequality and food poverty. But what you'll probably find is in that community, there's also a lot of groups then operating, running food banks, food shares and other things. The community is responding to that particular need. So all we're looking to do here in that sense is inject that data to make sure that we are tackling the right problems together with our communities. Ask our communities, how can we help you do that? What else do you need from us? And sometimes the answer will be nothing, leave us alone, which is brilliant. And that's a good situation to be in. And then as Councillor Daniels rightly points out, it's then making sure that we're providing that support to make sure that strength that the community has is sustainable. So if groups are struggling to recruit members, if groups are struggling with funding, that is where we're looking to work closely through the Community Wellbeing Strategy with Torvine Voluntary Alliance to really target those areas where we know that need can be met. We can't do it across all community groups. I wish we could, I'd love to, but we know we're not going to be able to do it across all groups. But we really do need to be doing it on those groups that are tackling the challenges in that individual community, and that gives us that ability to focus a little bit more. Does that make sense?
Okay, Rose?
Yes, thank you. It's just that, you know, there might be strength in one area, but a very weak area. I can give you an example in my own ward. CoStar is strong within the community for food, etc., but there may be a need for drug advice. And, you know, how do we go about that? So.
Anybody else, Dave?
Yeah, sorry, I completely forgot to answer that part of the question, so I'm glad that you gave us the opportunity again. Yes, you're absolutely right. That's the point of the community capacity builders that we've got. So they will look at what the needs are of that community. They'll do that assessment of where are the strengths, but also where are the gaps. And then they'll have the conversations with CoStar, with other groups, and if we can't find an existing group, then with the wider community about, look, this is the challenge, this is a problem that you may have in your area. How can we come together to solve that particular challenge? So as a classic example of CoStar there, CoStar may love the opportunity to get into that space and work with us to secure funding and other activity to tackle that problem. The issue we've got at the minute is that CoStar may not be aware that that's the essence of the problem. So yeah, I completely agree with that. I'm really glad you gave us the opportunity to come back in there.
Thanks. I may need to declare an interest there as a trustee of CoStar, so sorry.
Thank you, Rose. Do you want to go in?
Thanks, Janet. Yeah, I suppose it depends on your definition of communities, really, because I think I'm very conscious we're talking about geographical, in a geographical sense, when actually I think communities can very much be a group of people living with the same health conditions, and you know, this is very much part of the agenda that we've got here. And if you're asking, is there a consistent strength across all of those? And I think the answer, you know, in honesty, is no. You know, there's all sorts of health conditions that people are living with, and some are better supported than others. You know, I'm anecdotally aware, well, I am personally aware of Parkinson's support group. You know, there's a very strong dementia support group. You know, there are a range of other health conditions that people live with where there is a less strong presence in Torvine. So I think, you know, Dave referenced the community capacity and community connectors. You know, I think that there is a piece of work to be done there to make sure that there is that consistency in support. And it may not be that we can provide it on a geographical community basis, and it may have to be a central thing. It may not even be, it may have to be a regional thing on some things. But to answer your question on a health condition community side of things, I think that it varies wildly, and there is a piece of work there needed doing to make sure there is consistency, because at the end of the day, the ability of someone to manage their health condition that they've got is important to us, because we see them at some point, whether it's better or worse. So hopefully that sort of rounds out the answer a little bit.
Okay, Rose, do you want to come back?
Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, no, just to add on to what Councillor Daniel said then, yeah, I know of a number of health conditions where the people have to go to Cardiff to get any form of support or meet other people with a similar sort of condition. And then when you've already got a health condition, to then be told from Torfaen you've got to travel to Cardiff is a whole other layer of issues. So, yeah, I get what you're saying there completely.
Right. Next question actually comes from you, James. So it's question 6.
It does, thank you. Yeah, so continuing with the questions of around the challenges, it says, do all parts of the council signpost and connect people into the wellbeing offer effectively? We wondered what conversations have taken part at corporate level to deliver that.
Yeah, so in line with the way that we're working on all activity at the minute, discussions around these systems, around the community's approach, go into the council's leadership team. So these are discussed corporately and designed up corporately in terms of the responses. So we have had conversations corporately about the whole system, what this whole system would look like. And there's some key areas for us to look at here, aren't there? There's particularly areas like customer care. So making sure that customer care are aware of what that community offer is, and the front door will help with that. There's also those officers who are working out on the ground, outside of these parts, the adults and community parts of the world. And again, that once this system is in a position where we can launch it, we will then have conversations with individual members of or individual teams who are out on the ground to do that. So those conversations, we wouldn't start yet with individual teams because there's still more scrutiny, more challenge to do around the system before we get to that point. But corporately, there is absolutely buy-in to this approach. The community's approach is embedded within the county plan, and this is very much an extension of that approach. So detailed conversations yet to happen, but corporately, strategically, yes, there is conversations and buy-in.
Okay, yeah, that's good to hear. Thank you.
Okay. Right, if no one else wants to come in on that, we'll move on to Lucy's question, question 7 from Councillor Lucy Williams.
Thank you very much. So we're still on 3.9.6. So it's the 4th one down looking at hospitals. So the statement in the report says, is the wellbeing officer as well known to people being discharged from hospital as it is to people contacting the council directly from within the community? So it's just to understand what role do the partner agencies, especially the health board, play in this communication.
Absolutely. I feel like I'm using the word critical a lot today. It's because so much of the system is critical. It's really, really important that people who are making discharge decisions in hospital aren't discharging people without that understanding around what the community offer can do. We don't necessarily, certainly in the early days of the system, expect people who are making discharging decisions to know everything that's happening in the patch. Just as we're talking about that being a challenge for social workers, that challenge is amplified when you're talking about ward-based staff or even GPs if it's pre-hospital. So we don't expect people to know exactly what that offer is. But we do want to work closely with the health board, and we are working closely with the health board, to make sure that clinicians are aware that there is a community offer and that community offer can provide part of the wider wellbeing support needs of an individual. So we need to make sure, just as we'd have our conversations with social workers around us not over-prescribing care and support at the point someone hits from the community, we also need to have those conversations with the health board about them not over-prescribing or raising expectations around care and support beyond what the community can offer. So the good news is that those conversations are happening. We've got a really strong link with our health board around this discussion. We are looking at a couple of projects through the RPB, potentially. They're not yet coming forward, but they are ones that are in discussion around raising awareness amongst clinicians. I've had conversations directly with the relevant clinical directors within the health board around this approach, and they certainly agree with what we're talking around here. So there is a definite buy-in from the health board at a strategic level. The reality now is, how do we embed that in clinical practice? That's where we need to do the work. That's where the RPB funded projects will look to help plug that gap. But there is a buy-in.
Okay, you happy with that, Lucy? Do you want to do a supplementary?
I don't know, it may be answered further down, but kind of following on from that then, when the new model gets going, the hospital discharge assessments will all be placed in that central place. When that first starts, is there a risk that there could be blockages? Because currently that's being done in the teams. If that's all going to get done centrally, how is that going to be mitigated that there aren't blockages to hospital discharge? Sorry, I might have, that might be a question that's coming up later. I don't know.
Yeah, again, one of the issues that we're really mindful of is flow. It may be something we do touch on later, but there was a lot of debate and discussion around what the staffing structures at the front door would need to look like. Now, I'm not going to go into detail around individual staffing roles within that front door, but it is important to point out that there is a social work provision at that front door for that very reason. So that where we're looking at hospital discharge decisions, we need to make sure that the people who are there having those conversations around discharge have the right skill sets and the ability to direct people through the system quickly. So we have that new reablement part of the model. We would expect a lot of people coming from that hospital discharge route to flow through that reablement part of the model. But where it's people who aren't known to social services, that's part of the reason for having a social worker embedded at the front door. One other thing that I would say briefly on this is that where we've talked about reablement pathways before, we mentioned that if somebody is already known to social services and they've gone into hospital, they won't then be discharged back through the front door. They'll be discharged directly back to patch. So we're not going to interject the front door for people who are already known to patch or would be duplicating work, and you're right, would be causing blockages. So it's only for people who aren't yet known to one of the patch teams that we'd look to reintroduce the front door.
Okay, Lucy. Linda, you had your hand up. Do you want to come in, please?
Yes, please. Just during that, the answer to that question, it sort of brought up for me the issue of GPs' practices and whether or not we're having conversations with them at this point and how we're going to be sort of working with them going forward. They must be the front door for possible referrals in for many sort of conditions, age groups, needs. So are we doing that at the moment?
I mean, yes, so I think the answer to that is the neighbourhood care networks, the NCNs. I think that is our regular dialogue with GPs and local surgeries through that. I mean, and to tie it into Lucy's question around how do we make sure that that there's a consistent understanding in hospitals upon discharge that offer is the same as you'd get through the front door. I mean, I think it's ongoing engagement, because I think from a pragmatic point of view, from what I've seen, especially in times of crisis, I think the hospitals, quite honestly, have just, their goal has just been to discharge. And some of the softer side of things, which is the stuff, I mean, I put it in soft in quotation marks because some of this is essential. That side of things sort of feels lessened in comparison to the hard reality that they need to get people out and get those beds vacant. So I think that the answer to it is just regular engagement, because I think we do absolutely need that buy-in, because it is essential that people who are being discharged are being given that consistent advice and signposting to the support, which will effectively mean that they'll manage their condition better, manage their living health conditions better, and ultimately keep them out of a more kind of hard-end system. So hopefully that sort of ties together Lucy and your perspective, Linda. And another thing that another point that occurred to me is your point around the front door. And one of the first questions I had when Dave presented me with this report was around that expertise, that expert advice coming from people. How do we know that the people who are the very first people who are dealing with these people are know to signpost it to simply advice and information, or whether it's something more hard end. So that backstop of having social care expertise there at the front door is something I find very, very reassuring, and is essentially the answer to that particular concern. So I was very satisfied by that.
Okay, Lucy, does that answer your question? Okay. You've got the next question, Councillor Clarkson, is question 8.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Looking at 3.10.1 of the report, and it notes that indicators to supply of information are no longer collected following a change in the advice from Welsh Government. But would it still be useful for more localised knowledge and for our data to still include this with regards to monitoring processes?
In a nutshell, yes. We have to supply certain information through to Welsh Government, and it's right that we do so, and it allows for those broader comparisons, it allows for that understanding about how the whole system is working, and particularly when you've got hospitals and health boards working across local authority boundaries, it allows for more effective analysis of the discharge pathways. But that's not the only data that we need. There's two other sources of data that we need to be able to make sure the system's working effectively. We need management information. That's the information that enables team leaders to say, okay, have I got a particular issue happening within my team? What does my patch look like? What's the challenges, the demands that I've got coming through? It allows that day-to-day management of the service. And then we've got what I would call systems information, which goes beyond some of these Welsh Government indicators. And that allows Sarah, as the Head of Adult Services, it allows me and it allows the corporate leadership team to really scrutinise and intervene if necessary, to scrutinise whether the system is working in the way that we'd expect. Because this is so dependent on flow, so dependent on system, we need to be able to see at a glance what's happening in each stage of that journey. Information, advice and assistance, re-ablement, discharge numbers, flow, brokerage, the number of hours being brokered. All of those are really key pieces of systems information, not individual performance data, systems performance data that we need to scrutinise. So as part of this project, and this is the phase that we're at now, this is what we're working on now, we will have a new suite of systems performance data that will go on the Adult and Communities Balanced Scorecard that will be assessed and evaluated at leadership team on a quarterly basis so that we can see whether the changes are actually interfering with parts of the system that we perhaps didn't anticipate. And of course, you're right, information only will be a part of that.
Okay.
Yeah, that was exactly the sort of expansion that I was hoping for. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Linda. Councillor Evans, could I ask you to take question 9, please? It was raised by Councillor Best, but I'm sure you'll put your own spin on it. Thank you.
Yeah, go on in. I assumed that, then I could. The question I got is 3.10.4. The cost of demographic change is discussed in that particular paragraph, and under section 7, the Appendix 1. The service redesign is projected to release £1 million in savings, to the Project Apollo programme of service redesign. How will this £1 million in savings be achieved? The report states there is no planned redundancies, so how will the savings be achieved? All I'm concerned is about, are we going to be efficient as we are doing this? If there are efficiencies, how are we going to cope with dealing with that?
Yeah, really good question. Just to be crystal clear, this isn't an additional saving to the council over and above what we discussed in the re-ablement scrutiny. This is the same value. This isn't an extra £1 million over and above that. So we discussed, I think, in that re-ablement scrutiny session where a lot of those savings would come from. The reason it's referred to in this is that half of that saving is coming from a projected reduction in third-party spend. So that essentially means the number of hours that we're brokering, the number of placements that we're making in care home. If you don't get this part of the system right, then you don't have flow and you don't have properly right-sized packages. If we don't have properly right-sized packages, that makes it impossible for us to deliver those savings that we need within the re-ablement system. So it's referenced in here because it's part of that whole journey of flow through the system. The front door will ultimately help us work with communities to manage out some pressures that otherwise would come in as unnecessary hours on a care and support plan. For example, if we know we've got community groups that are really strong at providing community meals or that are really strong at providing stimulation activities, that type of thing, if that doesn't exist in a community, but an individual still needs it, the social worker will be required to say in the care and support plan, we need to find a mechanism for providing this, and the answer may then be brokerage. So we may be actually purchasing a service that our community are perfectly delivering elsewhere. So without this part of the front door being delivered, that's the impact if we don't get the front door right, if we don't get that information, advice and assistance out effectively.
Okay, Steve, does that answer your question?
Yeah, in respect, but how do we know we can achieve the £1 million? You know, if that's not, you know, you could spring it out of the air a figure, but knowing whether we can actually achieve that figure.
Steve, Councillor Daniels is going to come in.
Yeah, it was originally to supplement Dave's answer, really, which is that, well, for a number of years now, we've been consistently underspending in adult services because we haven't been able to recruit to existing roles. So this year, you know, this will shortly come to, it came to Cabinet earlier this week and it will come to Council later this month. No, I think next month. That, you know, we've underspent by about 1.4 million. You know, we're not able to recruit to certain roles in the current setup. So this whole redesign will hopefully mean that we'll create a system which, you know, is more efficient and has more attractive roles and just basically works a lot better. So in terms of the question around redundancy, you know, it's one that I needn't be too concerned about if I were you.
Dave, do you want to come in?
Yeah, just something that I forgot to mention that I think is really important to the second part of Councillor Evans' question there. We've seen in the 2 years we've been delivering a communities approach, we've already started to see a positive impact in terms of the amount of care and support that we're brokering. So this is about taking that approach further. But if you look at some of the trend lines that we've got, even though our demographics are showing that we should be seeing increased demand, we're not seeing increased demand to the full scale that we would otherwise have expected to see. So if you look at what it should be doing, and the line going upwards, you look at where we are now, there is a gap. That gap represents a saving. So we know that there are savings to be made from delivering this more effectively because we know that's what's happening now. What we're talking about here is really building on that approach and increasing that gap from where the demographics would say that we should be, if we weren't to do anything different, to where we are now by implementing this approach. So we can't ever guarantee that that level of savings will come through. But what we can say is that we've already seen good work towards that trajectory. And we know that it's done because of the changes that we're recommending here, the early implementation of some of the changes we're recommending here. So we know that we should be seeing that gap narrow. So hopefully that gives you a bit more reassurance as to the how we know.
Okay, everyone? Right. We'll move on to our last question in this section, and it comes from Linda. It's question 10, please.
Thank you, Chair. We're aware that information advice assistance model is being adopted by local authorities and implemented across Wales. So the question I have is, are we likely to see all Wales guidance coming forward as the new system sort of develops within local authorities? And are we looking at best practice through the information that is coming back from other local authorities who have already adopted the information advice approach?
This may sound a bit glib, and it's not intended to. We're intending to be the best practice in this. This is an area that we are really focusing in on as a social care team. We're really sort of developing that communities approach and the way that that interrelates to information, advice and assistance. So we've, of course, looked at what else is happening elsewhere, but we believe this is the right approach for Torfaen. And actually, we anticipate others coming to speak to us around this approach and how that approach is being developed. Now, I know Helen and the team have had many a conversation, certainly with other counterparts. There's certainly a few North Walian authorities that we've spoken to around their information, advice and assistance models too. And of course, that's factored into the design. We think we're pushing that a little bit further because it aligns to that communities approach as well, which isn't always done. In terms of the All Wales guidance, I'm not anticipating anything coming forward. But the approach that we're talking about here, myself, the Chief Executive and others, are regularly raising this with Welsh Government officials as to the approach that Torfaen is taking. So I would hope that if we did ever see any guidance coming out over and above what's included within the Act, that it would be reflective of those discussions that we've had about the impact that this system can make, the positive changes that we can make with this system. The Act itself is quite specific around information, advice and assistance. There are some key requirements within the Social Services and Wellbeing Act around how we deliver that service. And just to reassure members, we have obviously taken that into account in the way that we've designed the service. So we're comfortable that we're compliant with the statutory guidance and the legislation that's in place currently.
Okay, Linda, does anyone
Yep,
else
that's
want to
brilliant.
come in? Helen, do you want to come in or anything, please?
No, thank you, Chair.
That completes the first section of our questioning. And scrutiny question 1, are members comfortable with the rationale for change to the way this information, advice and assistance is delivered? We will have recommendations later, but what are your thoughts at the moment?
I think I would want to say, sort of, particularly following all your, the further detail, I think that it's very clear what the rationale is, and I think I personally would completely endorse that.
Everyone happy? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Our next set of questions are on the proposed new system. And Councillor Clarkson, do you want to come in with question 11, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. This is sort of pertaining to 4.1 of the report. The proposed new system will introduce a single information, advice and assistance hub, removing the complexity for residents, which is a great aspiration, and I'm hoping that will be achieved. How will the new system be communicated to residents and all partners and external agencies who make contact? This question comes from reading a Welsh audit report, which looked at Denbighshire, who had examples. They designed a wheel of need that people could sort of use so that they could see what sort of services were available, where they could go. So it's about communication again. How are we communicating this new model and how it can help people to the community?
Yeah, if I'm completely candid here, this is an area that we know we need to do. We know we need to have a comms approach for this, but we haven't looked at the detail of what that comms approach is going to look like. So I certainly think that that's an area we can focus now, that the project team going forward is the communication strategy for this. Certainly activities like that Wheel of Need are really, really helpful, and we will be getting that general advice out into community. So those approaches that say, if you're in this position, this is the right place for you to go, really, really important. Where we need to just be that little bit cautious is around directly directing people to individual community activities that are taking place, because again, no sooner have we advertised it, that activity may well cease. So we've got to be mindful of that. It's more around people knowing that they can speak to their community around that, and we can help signpost them to the right community activity, as opposed to doing that direct referencing there.
Okay, Linda, you're happy? I know Councillor Daniels wants to come in.
Yeah, again, just to supplement Dave's answer, really, which is that I think, believe it or not, I think there are some people who still don't know the routes to take to make a referral, as it is at the moment. So I think it is actually an opportunity to start afresh with and in the public consciousness the correct route to go down. Anecdotally, I've been not in this local authority, but family members trying to know where to go to refer, a family friend into, and it just didn't occur to them to go through, the local authority's front door, essentially, the customer care. So, I get a strong feeling that as things are, there is a strong need to reiterate, or in this case, start afresh, that correct route to go down if you come across somebody who has that particular need or seems to have that need.
Yeah, if I could come back, please, briefly, I totally agree with that. And that is one of the benefits I see of having the single point of contact at the front door, is that it takes away the complexity of having to decide where to go, what to do. It's just that some sort of explanation within that as to what people can find or expect would sort of enhance that. And I agree. I get contacted by residents who've got no idea where to start, and I'm hoping this will simplify the referral in process greatly.
And, Rose, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the Denbighshire Wheel. Many years ago, when we changed day services, we had a menu, which was, the options that were available. So a menu of choices could be a really useful tool. However, everybody needs to have it. Bronavon needs to have it. The doctor's surgeries needs to have it. So that type of communication, so that we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. And it can be added to if there are services that come up and are available or actually need to come off it. That kind of communication is useful, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. Can I come in? I'm going back to my own language. Everyone uses different means of communication. Well, this is taking part. As you know, Dave, we got the forums, the over 50s forums, perhaps presentations and consultations in various resource centres like the surgery in Bernarden and other surgeries in and around our borough would be most useful for older people who don't use digital IT. So could that be considered? Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, I think it's an opportunity. So I think, we'd be remiss not to take every opportunity to recognise completely that there are many members of the public out there that don't access certain routes of information. So, yes, certainly, I think we'd be remiss not to try every avenue we could go down, really, just to get this into the consciousness, and help people understand where to go, because, it is the key to us delivering an effective service, people knowing where to go, when to go, and having the confidence to go as well. That latter bit being the most important thing, because I frequently come across people who don't have the confidence. They have a feeling of the right route, but not necessarily the confidence to do so.
And possibly liaising more with the ward councillors who know their area and the people, because, as Linda said, we all get contacted by residents, but signposting a little bit more.
Yeah, just to make one broader point, actually, which is that the work that we do at the front door is just one part of the way that the council communicates corporately with people. So I know our corporate comms team have been engaged already to start thinking around some of this. As I say, we haven't got that finalised comms plan yet, but they're prepped and ready to go. And that will include our engagement and participation officers. So things like the over 50s forum, I'm sure they'll be looking at as part of that approach. So that I'm sure that will be picked up.
Thank you both. Next question comes from Jane.
Thank you. Looking at 4.1.3, the key differences between the two models. In the new model, it states that the staff at the IAA Hub will triage and prioritise referrals across the whole of Torfaen, releasing social work capacity in the patches. So what operational benefits will that bring?
So at the minute, and it's described early, but I think it's worth me elaborating on, each of the patches operates slightly differently, but with a fairly similar vein. And that's for when an inquiry comes through, is triaged by a duty officer. Now, normally, because they can get through them quite quickly, they're very, very efficient at doing this. It's the team leaders who are doing that triaging when things come in. The challenge that we've got then, of course, means that we've got team leaders who are fulfilling that role that can be fulfilled by other officers across the team that don't necessarily need that social work expertise to the same level. They need to be supervised by people who have that expertise, but they don't necessarily need to be qualified to the same extent. So what this will do is, by having those staff embedded within a hub, the CCW staff essentially, it will mean that they are able to answer a lot of those queries that come in without it meaning that we need to take it into individual duty social workers or into team leaders quite often in that patch-based system. What that will do is free up that capacity and that resource for us to be able to do two things. One is for us to be able to really scrutinise, challenge and have that time to consider those individuals when they come through into the patch team. And the other is for us to continue to consider social work as an intervention. So where we're actually delivering social work to achieve an activity rather than social work as just being a broker of care and support. Now, we've got to be careful with that. That's a part of the system that we need to make sure we don't overdo. We don't want to be disempowering by taking that approach. But it is a really important part of social work practice in Torfaen and something that we absolutely don't want to lose. Now, we need to be careful, of course we do, when we implement a model like this. I'm saying that it will free up capacity there, which it will, but it may generate an additional pressure elsewhere in the system. So we will be looking at how we get the staffing levels right across all of the different parts of the system, of course we will. But that's the rationale for us changing the model in that way.
Okay, Joe? Yes. Okay. Anyone else want to come in before we move on? Okay. Next question comes from Linda, Councillor Clarkson. It's question 13, please.
Thank you. It follows on very nicely from Councillor Watkins' question. It's well known, understood and recognised that triage is most successful when it's carried out people with the right knowledge, experience and training. So the question is, as you've answered part of my question I was going to ask, how are we going to ensure that the CCWs are in this position, and how is that supervision actually going to work for them?
Yeah, so our CCWs do have a very, very strong skill set in this area. They've undergone training. It just means that they won't have the same level of professional qualification that some of our social work staff have. So there's certainly been a core amount of training that our CCWs will have gone through. They're a very, very skilled group of staff, as everyone in the system is. But I know, as Councillor Daniels pointed out earlier, one of the discussions that we had very early on in the process here was around that supervision and how do we make sure that that supervision works effectively. If somebody isn't quite sure on that particular case what to do, who do they speak to? So there will be a team leader capacity embedded at the front door as part of the redesign, and there will be social work presence at the front door, and that's to allow those checks and balances. So there's a lot of work that Sarah, as the head of adults, and the wider team are looking at the minute around culture. We need to really strike a fine balance here between people feeling confident that they can ask a question if they're not sure, but empowered to take the decision when they think that it's the right one to do. This is all around getting the balance right in terms of positive risk-taking by individuals operating at that front door. And so the system and the way that the culture will develop within that team is about saying to CCWs, you are empowered to take these decisions. If you've got a query, come and speak to us. But once we've had that conversation, I want you to go away and take action on it now, rather than everything being referred into the social care team. And that's something we'll be very, very closely monitoring through the performance measures on the front door to make sure that that culture is the one that's embedding. I have every confidence that it will, because I know the skills levels that we have within both the CCWs and the social workers. So hopefully that gives you a bit of reassurance that the right supervision is in place, whilst not disempowering the staff who are there to do that role.
Yeah, I'm glad you used the word culture, because that is the change that we're looking at here. These people stepping into a different role, and triage being a slightly different sort of, it's what they do, it's what they know, it's what they understand, but it's a different way of approaching it for them. So that, yeah, that does sort of provide the reassurance, and hopefully the staff will feel well supported during the change.
Okay, Dave, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, that one small disadvantage, if it is a disadvantage, is that risk of disempowerment, which, you know, Dave, I think is satisfyingly sort of addressed, and the potential for CCWs to be, you know, referring on people who do just need information, advice and assistance onto perhaps a slightly more intense route. But I think that is a price worth paying to make sure people don't fall through the gaps. You know, and this is again part of the initial question that I had when they presented this to me, is making sure that people don't fall through those gaps. So I think it is a necessary thing to have that supervision there, and I think it very much counterbalances that small disadvantage. So.
That's part of taking on the role of triage. You know, it is about they will build experience within that role, which is very new to them. So it is that supervision at the front end, so that they feel supported until they build up their own sort of, not experience and confidence of carrying out that role. And there's never any harm on someone, as long as it doesn't impact on their sort of movement through the service. There's never any harm on anyone being referred on, as long as it is being reviewed at the next stage very quickly. So yeah, that's reassuring to hear.
Yeah, I mean, just come back on that really. I am comfortable, personally comfortable, that the finished product that we've come up with means that people will get the right service at the right time, and that people won't fall through the gaps. That was one of the main things for me, is making sure that there wasn't even a possibility of that happening. And I think where we're at now satisfies all of that.
Right, okay, Linda. Lucy, do you want to ask the next question, please?
Yes. Just before going on to the next question, just as... Well, yes, I've got the next question anyway, but just as an add-on to that, a practical example, speaking as a past CCW, I think one of the things what I'm picking up is, certainly in terms of the triaging and the assessment, CCWs have already been doing that in the patches, so it's not necessarily an extra add-on to the skill set. It's a development of an already existing skill set. So I think it's important. It's useful for us to recognise that. So that was just a point to that. So the question I wanted to ask. So this is looking at. When I was reading this report, I referred back to the Integrated Enablement report. So it was trying to understand, so the development of the integrated reablement and the development of the front door, is this kind of like sequential, or is the integrated reablement and the front door thing sort of happening along the same lines? Does that make sense?
In terms of implementation timeline,
yes,
they're both happening at the same time. Right. Both parts of the system we're aiming to have subject to scrutiny feedback and final acceptance. We're looking to have both parts of the system up and running, and ideally trialling by April. And what that will allow us to do is really see whether the flows are going in the right places. We'll then take, as we said with the IR project, 12 months to really scrutinise, assess and challenge whether that new process is working in the way that we want, because there will be tweaks. We know that when we implement a systems change like this, we know there'll be tweaks. And those tweaks may happen at slightly different times depending on where the pressures take it. But April is the implementation date for both projects.
Jane, the next question has been more or less answered, but do you want to add anything to it to come in on the key differences?
Yeah, well, just slightly, just in case there's anything extra that Dave wants to tell you. So, also on the key differences, it says that all hospital referrals for those not known to the patch teams will come through the IAA service. So will training or workshop presentations be offered to the Health Board on the new proposed system?
Yeah, we've developed these proposals through the workshops with Health Board input. So not only will we do the training and the presentation, they've been instrumental in helping us shape what the system actually looks like. And that's really important. To take you back to the previous question that came through, we've talked around culture change and the approach we're going to take to culture within the front door. But there is a culture piece that we need to work with the Health Board on around discharge, around clinical involvement in those decisions, and around how their interface with the front door will now work. So that's something that we certainly will pick up on an ongoing basis now, and the Health Board are fully in support of us doing that.
Okay, I got the next question. How are we planning for a smooth transition between these processes?
It's a really, really good question. There's two very big systems changes that we're talking about here, the integrated reablement and the front door. And, of course, both of those will result in big changes, not only to the way that we staff those parts of the structure, but to the way that residents will engage with us as a service and how they'll move through that system. So how are we looking to mitigate that? We're looking to, as I say, introduce both of these parts of the system at the same time so that we can see the connections between them. What I wouldn't want to do is introduce one and not the other, and then lo and behold, we realise we've got an issue with flow. Well, we know we have an issue with flow if we don't introduce the two parts of the system. That's the basis on which we've presented it. So that's one way, is introducing the two at the same time. The second way, then, is accepting that we're not always going to get every single part of this right from day one. We could spend years and years and years designing a system and a plan, and on day one, when you implement that plan, something will happen that you hadn't seen. That's an inevitable part of project implementation. So we're moving very, very quickly in the development of this and accepting that we will still need to make some tweaks and some changes as we go through, and that's why we're talking about keeping this under constant review. And we're doing a lot of work with teams now. I know the team in adult social care have been having a lot of conversations with group managers in particular. Group managers have been heavily influential in terms of designing up these two systems because they're the ones with the knowledge. That them, the social workers, the CCWs and the wider team, they are the ones who understand how the system works in practice. So they are the ones to almost sense check and throw in some of the challenges that we might face. So that piece of work has also taken place to try and pave the way for implementation when it kicks in. And the final one, and this is something that Helen and the team have really led on, is we've taken through some real-life case study examples based on existing customers that we've got. So we've looked at what happens if we get an inquiry in from the police. We've looked at what happens when we get an inquiry who's discharged from hospital, when we get an incorrect discharge from hospital that needs to go back, when we get someone who approaches us saying that they need a care and support plan when actually we think it's probably information, advice and assistance. We've run through those different scenarios with real life examples to say, okay, what would they do at this part of the journey? Then where would they go? Then where would they go in the new system? So as far as we possibly can, we've sort of trialled it and tested it before it's been implemented as well.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you that now, if we tried anything out. Because I think as a committee we feel that we don't make any gaps during this transition period. So thank you, and thank you for giving us a brief sort of idea on the caseload and how you've done it. Does anyone want to come in? Jane?
Thank you. It's interesting to hear that you ran actual cases, took actual things that have happened and then ran through the new system. Are you able to say, did it always show that they would have been better coming through the new system, or mostly show that it would have been better through the new system?
At the start of that workshop, I would say mostly show. By the end of that workshop, with the changes that we've made, I would say for the cohort that we ran through, it would say always show, because that's why we ran them. So we'd run one, we'd see actually there's an issue here. To take the social work presence at the front door, that came as a result of that case study process. So we ran someone through that and thought, hang on a second, this person may have been at risk of slipping through the net, not at risk of harm, but at risk of slipping through the net and having to come back round to the system if we don't inject this support at this point. So we redesigned it slightly to put that support in. So by the time we'd gone through that, we were confident that of all those case studies we ran through, they would have all received a more efficient, better service, and a service that would have given them the right support at the right time, which is important, by going through the new system. What I can't say is that for every single person that we have operating and who we're working with from a social care perspective, it will be exactly the same journey, and that's why we need to learn along the way as well. We're never going to run a system where we put people in a position where they're in harm. That's certainly what we will absolutely try and avoid. That's the first principle of our design. But we know that we may get instances where people come back round into the system again because we may not have signposted correctly in the first place. Now, of course, we know that will happen. That's not to say that doesn't happen now. And that's why we've got to be a bit careful with this. We're not saying that this is a perfect system that isn't going to have any issues. We're saying it's a better system than the one that we've got in place currently.
Yeah, no, that's good. It's good to know that it was a really useful thing to do, and that it showed that, and then you were tweaking until you got it. Yeah, no, that's very good. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dave. I was concerned about reoccurring, people going through the system and then having to come back. So how are we addressing it? So thank you for that. Okay. Question has already been asked, but briefly, Lucy, do you want to add anything to it? It's question 17.
The only thing I just wanted to clarify, not yeah, is obviously the two specialist teams are still existing, mental health and additional learning needs. Will they still carry out their own assessment and triaging, or will that?
Yes, it's something that we're still working on the sort of finer detail through as to what the interface is between those, but they will certainly retain the sort of functions that they provide now. We just need to work through the smoothing of the front door between those two. What we don't want is a situation where people are presenting in the two specialist teams directly when actually they would have benefited from generic information, advice and assistance and circumventing that new front door. Equally, what we don't want is people going through a front door where their needs would better be met elsewhere in the system. So we're just looking at how we sort of smooth the transition between those two.
Okay, anyone else want to come in? Okay. So you have the next question. Do you want to come?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in 4.13 of the report, it stated that the anticipated challenges of operating under the new model are the new system is reliant on flow, particularly through the integrated reablement service. Now, we've spoken a bit about this, but the question really is, have we considered contingencies should flow through the integrated reablement service become a challenge at any point, therefore impacting on the front door? I think what we've all learnt in the last few years is that unexpected things happen. So have we anticipated in that any way and put any contingency in place?
Yes, in short. So when we brought the integrated reablement approach forward, we talked around some of the vacancies that we have within that service at the minute, and we talked around one of the easiest solutions for us to do to be able to achieve the change that we wanted was to remove those vacancies entirely from the system. That's not what we did, because we know that we need the ability to flex capacity within IR if we're starting to see challenges on flow. Now, there are risks around that. Of course, there are to do with recruitment and how quickly we can bring people into that service. But we really wanted to make sure that within that service, we have the capacity to flex on the establishment, on the built establishment that dictates the council's budget. So that's really the point in the system where we need to react if there was a problem with flow. What we're looking at here is how do we help manage and stem some of the flow into IR where that flow wouldn't be appropriate to go into that service. And that's where the challenge really is here on flow, and that's where our performance management regime will kick in. So the front door service will of course have measures and numbers that we expect we would see. That's not a target for individuals. That's not saying when you've hit 65 people you can't take 66 through. Of course not. That would cause chaos within the system and be disastrous. But it is saying that if we're starting to see from a systems perspective that we're only at 40% of people receiving information, advice and assistance, where we think we should be at 70%, what's going on there? We need to understand that. We need to listen to some of the conversations that are happening and really reassure ourselves in a senior position that those conversations are the right ones to be taking place and that we're not flowing too many people through into IR. So the performance systems that we put in place at the front door will be critical, and the vacancy capacity within IR is the contingency while we iron that out.
Okay, Lucy. Anybody else want to come in? Lucy, Jane, anyone? Okay, Steve, can I ask you to take the next question, please, which is question 19?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. While there are no anticipated redundancies because introducing a new system, the system will require changes to the staffing within the patch teams and realignment of resource capacity. Will there be a need for the further training in any aspects for the new team?
There may well be. What we'll do in the first instance is, once we've set up the structures, we'll do training in terms of the new system and the new model. I call that training. That will be sort of informal. This is the way that it'll work. These are what the performance measures are. This is how we want to develop your practice as CCW. So all of that will happen as a matter of course. Once the system is up and running then, with that basic level of support provided by us, that basic level of training provided by us, we'll really start to gauge where some of the challenges are on an individual level. So are there some people who perhaps don't have that same level of confidence to be able to take those decisions? Are there some individuals who are referring cases through to the social worker where maybe that's not necessarily needed in that instance? And we'll build up the training plans based on that. So there'll be that generic information raising, if you like, and alerting people to what the new system looks like, what the protocols are, what the culture is that we expect, how the systems will work. All of that will happen as a matter of course as part of setup. But when it comes to more detailed training on an individual basis, we won't know that until the system's operating.
Are you satisfied with that question? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Linda, do you want to come in with question 20, part of which has been answered? But if you
I think we've already covered this, Chair.
Yeah.
I'm quite happy that we move on to the next question.
Thanks, Linda. Lucy, question 21, please.
Thank you very much. It's just to identify a little bit more about the this role of community capacity builder. Are we right in saying it's a new post? So how will they be working with the? Well, I guess how many are there, and how will they be working with the community connectors? How's that going to work out?
Yeah, forgive me in terms of the number. I believe it's 6, but I will get that clarified for you in terms of the specific number that we have of capacity builders. If I explain the way that the whole system works, so we've got community activity that's already taking place there, but as we've talked about, we know that there may be gaps within that community activity where we want to share data, share information, and help community groups to plug that gap. That's the role of a capacity builder. So the capacity builder is out on the ground, in the patch, looking at what the data says the needs are in that area, and then helping community groups to align their provision to that data, so that we're really bolstering those areas where the community is really strong and helping the community to fill some gaps where there may be gaps in what the community wellbeing officer can do. So that's the role of the capacity builder. The role of the connector is then about forming the bridge, if you like, between that capacity and between the front door, the social care teams, etc., and indeed GPs, the health service. So the connector's role is about connecting individuals into that capacity once that capacity exists. And we're still working through whether that's going to be on the basis of a sort of referral system into the connectors from the front door, or whether it's based on the connectors having the knowledge of what's happening within the patch and sharing that proactively with the front door. We're working through exactly how that service needs to operate going forward, and that's something we'll look at this year. And then you've got the front door itself. And what we're saying with the front door is they need that understanding from the capacity builders as to what the community offer is in each area, and they need to make sure they're getting that through regularly. So connectors, very much about connecting individuals into the community activity. Capacity builders, very much about building it up where it doesn't exist.
To answer your question, anybody else want to come in? Okay, Linda, your next question. Linda,
question 20. Yeah, question 22. Community capacity builders, they've been appointed through shared prosperity funding and external funding. So we all know the situation with funding ongoing. So what contingency planning do we have for funding these posts should funding cease? Or is there an anticipation of this role changing as this service develops?
There's two parts to this for me. We, of course, hope that there is a replacement to shared prosperity funding. Shared prosperity funding was the funds brought in to replace EU funding, and there is certainly a hope and an expectation on our part that that will continue to be available in some guise going forward. And that capacity building role is a critical part of that for us, so it's certainly something that I would be advocating within leadership team that we prioritise in any successive funds. But if those funds don't become available, I would be saying there's an onus on us, and certainly on me, to prove that this concept works in terms of making this system more efficient and managing demand coming through social care. Because if we're ever going to make a case for roles like this to become part of the core establishment and what the council should be doing to enable us to deliver our core services in the most effective and efficient way, then members would rightly expect us to be able to justify that and to be able to show the savings that we could make by having these roles in place, and that the roles, in essence, pay for themselves from those savings that transpire elsewhere in the system. So we've certainly got essentially 12 months of us operating this system now to be able to make that case and to prove the concept that capacity building helps to manage down unnecessary demand elsewhere in that wider social care system.
Okay, anyone else want to engage? Okay.
I mean, mildly political point. I mean, it is obviously very frustrating that we're, the new SPF model is very much at the whim of the government of the day, and that's increasingly, unstable. There is something to be said for the consistency and the stability that was offered by the European funding route. So that's all I'll say on that. But yeah, I think in terms of the argument for it, I think there was always a strong argument for capacity building, always, and I think there always will be. And I think, as David said, I think the onus is on us to show and to effectively tell that story, because I think that, community resilience is essentially the key to this model working, to our communities thriving, essentially. The ability for them to look after themselves is absolutely essential. And they do need, whilst many community groups and whilst many geographical community groups and many person-based community groups do function perfectly well on their own, there are plenty of examples in my time that I've seen where they have needed that as support from us as a council, whether it be grants or whether it be consistency or whether it be any other element. And I think this is exactly what that team provides and will provide. So I'm very confident there is a strong argument for that need for these these capacity builders to, it's not the word, community capacity officers to make sure that there is that consistency and that there is that sustainability, because we really rely on that. We really, really need it, as a council, and for the people who rely on the groups and the services that those groups provide.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it's good to hear that the evidence is being gathered and key to ensuring that we can continue this going forward, because it really is, community resilience is key.
Thank you, Linda. Dave, CCW is probably the easier way to say it because I keep getting mixed up. Okay. That brings us to the end of our second section, the scrutiny question 2. Are members comfortable that the proposed service model will deliver effective and efficient outcomes for our residents? Bearing in mind that this is just before our recommendations, it's just an overarching view. Linda, do you want to come in?
Yes, please. I'm very comfortable and confident with what I've heard today, that this has been, really thoroughly sort of looked at, and the issue now will be the implementation and the continuing evaluation and assessment of how it's going. I'm comfortable that the data is going to be collected and a continuous assessment is going to be carried out. So yeah, I'm confident and I can answer that question in the positive.
Do we have any recommendations? Or do you want to leave it for discussion after? Okay.
Only to move forward as quick as possible with it.
Okay, yeah, that's lovely, Steve. Our concluding questions now comes from question 23, which was for Councillor Seaborn, but I think most of it's been answered already, Rose. But do you have any supplementary that you want to add to it, please?
I will ask the question because it's about 5.1, and these workshops run a series of hypothetical and existing cases through the new system to understand whether the proposed system would appropriately triage and provide the right level of support to maintain the individual's independence in the community. How confident can we be that these workshop sessions have covered all possible scenarios and identified potential challenges and gaps? Just the gap time. I think you know, we're to be commended that actually this is one good thing that's come out of COVID, is actually the work within our community. But, you know, there may still be gaps, and how confident are we that we've identified those?
I think the answer is we're fairly confident that we've identified them because we've run so many different groups through this. What I will say is that we know every person who speaks to our social care teams has an individual suite of needs. What we can never do is assess every individual through this when we're doing the modelling. And if we were to do that, no sooner had we set up the system, we'd be faced with a new group of individuals who are approaching us with a different set of needs again. What I am confident in is that some of those key points within the system, so flow between different parts of the system, how people would interact with AR, what the relationship is between hospital discharge, what the function of a social worker is within the front door, how the front door interrelates to the patch teams, how it relates to the police. The workshops have teased out what I believe are those key issues. And that was the purpose of those workshops. And I'm very confident that it's done that effectively.
Okay, Rose?
Thank you.
I mean, you know, I'd supplement Dave's answer, really. I think the honest answer from me is that I don't think it's ever going to capture everything. I think, you know, I think you are going to, there is a certain element of trial and error to any redesign. But I am confident that there will be an intense focus on the delivery and how, you know, how this pans out over the next year for us to be able to look at what's working well, what's not working so well. There will be plenty, as Dave has articulated, there is a wide variety of different circumstances, cases. Each case will be different from the other. So there will be an awful lot of learning involved, and it comes down to our ability to adapt to that and learn from it. So I think that intense focus on the new method of delivery over the next year will tease out a lot of things. So, you know, I think it's important to be honest and say from the off, there will be things that we haven't factored in because that's the nature of these things and the nebulous nature of the demand that's out there. But we will see that in real time in the next year, and it will hopefully strengthen the service as we learn from it.
Yeah, I agree. It's a case of trial and error at the moment, and with the situations and issues that our communities have now, is going to be more ongoing and more pressure on our services, isn't it? Okay. Okay. Anybody else want to come in? Okay. Next question is from Lucy. It's question 24, please.
I'm actually pretty confident that we've answered this question already. So. Yeah. Do you want to add anything to it? It was basically about the engagement between health boards and hospital discharge. So I'm confident we've answered that one.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. Linda, if you'd like to come in with question 25, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's sort of mentioned in the report about police-generated public protection notices, and I know we've spoken about this in the past, that there seems to be high numbers of them that don't actually progress anywhere. So are we still going to need to monitoring those referrals coming in from the police? And has there been any progress on working with them regarding how these police public protection notices are being referred in?
Yes, we are going to continue to need to work with the police on it, in answer to the first question. One of the large areas, and members will be aware of this, I'm sure, from scrutinies that were before my time, but one of the large areas that we need to focus in on is consent. Quite often we get information raised through PPNs where we don't have the right consents in place for them to have shared the data with us, so for us to be able to act on that data. So it's not only a question of is there a need, which in many cases, as you'll see from the number that aren't taken forward, there is not from a social care perspective. It's also that regime around consent and data sharing that we need to take forward as well. Those conversations are happening very robustly with the police and the team, and I'm really pleased to say there is progress being made. So the team are engaging really, really well with the police on that. And there is an attitude from the police that they're keen to do this, keen to work with us on it. Now, one of the areas we need to keep an eye on over the time is how far the police will continue to engage in this area of work. We're aware of changes already being trialled and taking place in England around police involvement in some of the welfare activities and whether that continues. And that's an area we're monitoring closely as that presumably gets rolled out further into the rest of the UK and certainly into Wales, into the Gwent force as well. So I know that Sarah is very well engaged in those discussions. That will have a bearing on PPNs. We expect the number of PPNs to significantly drop if there's changes to the way that the police approach welfare activity. Equally, we need to make sure that as a result of those changes, there aren't people who are slipping through the net where the police have that safeguarding duty and responsibility in law to respond.
Okay, Linda, do you want to come back in, or does anyone else want
No,
to?
that's fine, thanks.
Okay, I've got the next question. It's pre-consultation engagement sessions with staff was arranged for the 11th of January. Are you able to give us a brief update on these sessions, please?
So this was around raising awareness of the model. I think it's a lesson that we learned and something we've certainly reflected on since the IR process. When we undertook that IR engagement, we were really mindful of getting things done in the right order, and we wanted to bring information into scrutiny for that challenge before we then started conversations around implementation of the model. I'm not convinced we got that phasing entirely right, and we've had this discussion with staff within the IR and the wider domiciliary care teams, because obviously members of the public staff would have been aware of what we were presenting to scrutiny when those reports went public. So this consultation and engagement session was very much around sharing some of that initial thinking for thought and comment, but also raising awareness that the scrutiny session was coming and what would likely be discussed within the session. So it was learning and reflection based on the IR conversation was the rationale for that.
Okay. Do you want to come in? Anybody else want to say? Okay, we're coming to our last but one question, and that's again from Councillor Clarkson, and it's question 27.
Okay, thank you very much. Our unofficial unpaid carers are a very important part of this, and they often get sort of forgotten and left out. So have we actually done any work with our known unpaid carers to find out what their needs are, and how are we going to disseminate information down towards people who are already carrying out sort of caring roles within the community with their families and relatives?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Unpaid carers are a critical part of the system, and the amount of activity and work that's done by unpaid carers is something that, as I know as a council, we're extremely grateful for and in awe of, and this gets raised very often. What we've done to date is when those workshop sessions were run, we've run examples through those workshops of people who are in unpaid caring roles to understand how that's going to impact on the flow. What we perhaps haven't done yet, and I wouldn't expect us to until we've taken this through this committee today, is really started that detailed engagement with unpaid carers, A, on what the system is going to be and how that may impact on unpaid carers, but B, in terms of their thoughts on how we can strengthen some of the practice that we have within the front door and elsewhere in the system to support them and the role that they do. That conversation I would expect to take place during the comms and engagement phase of this. If that has a significant bearing in terms of the design of the model, then we'll of course update members via email to let you know of any changes that we require as a result of that. So there's a couple of different bits there. Yes, we've looked at it in terms of where we think the impact will be through the modelling, but the comms and engagement is still yet to take place more formally.
Lucy, do you want to come in with the last question of the morning?
Well, the last question is it's a simple question, but it's actually what timeline are we working to in terms of finalising and implementing the new system? And I think you mentioned April of 25? No, 24. Mm. That seems quite quick. Given all the given all the training and the consultation, so maybe just to kind of like give a little bit more background to that.
Yeah, so as we've been designing this project, we've done a lot of that engagement internally with teams. So it's the same conversation that we have around integrated re-enablement. We've talked around some of that new practice, new culture, performance measures are being developed as we speak. The comms plan is something that we're going to be launching soon. Certainly, I would have thought within the next month or so off the back of this session. So a lot of the prep work that's needed to get that system up and running has already started before today's meeting. April is the go live date for the new system because, of course, we need a fixed point in time for us to actually make that transition over. But if we're still finding that we're getting teething problems when we do that, there is always the opportunity for us to start saying, okay, this part of it's not quite working in the way that we anticipated, let's look at that again. What I'm nervous of is if we extend that date to, say, September, say April next year, all that buys us is more time to look at this theoretically and look at how the system might operate. We're at the point, I think, where we need to start understanding how the system will operate. So the training is a really important point, and it's something I know Helen and the team will now take away off the back of this session and make sure that we have ample time there for us to ensure that staff are familiar with the new system, understand the new culture, the new protocols and everything else. And if we need to delay it a little bit because of that, then I'm comfortable to do so. What I wouldn't want to do is delay it much longer just for some of that fine-tuning and testing. I think we need to get the system live and see how it works in practice.
So just to try and understand then, from an operational point of view, if it's going to be going live in April, so there's going to need to be quite a big shift from the patch teams to the new IAA centre. So you're confident that there's sufficient time for that transfer to happen with sufficient any gaps in training to be done, ready to go by April? Just maybe talk around that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm confident the actual transition that we're talking around here is in essence moving staff from within a particular team and embedding them within a new team. That doesn't need to be a particularly long process. That can be done quite quickly, that relocation to a different team. We're not looking, as we've said, around redundancy consultations here. There will be obviously conversations with the team around some of these transitions, but it's unlikely to make any impact in terms of terms and conditions, which of course requires longer consultation periods. So the important thing for us with this is really around moving people into their new teams and then embedding the culture within that team. If we're struggling to do that by April, I agree with you and accept April is ambitious, and rightly so, we should be pushing this to happen quickly. If we're struggling to get that fully done by April, I'm quite comfortable for it to extend into May, just to buy us that little bit more time to be able to do that. But from a formal consultative perspective, we're not anticipating any major issues.
Okay. I know it might sound a silly question, but for those people who may be listening to us online, the IAS front door, where are we going to be based? Are we going to be based in here, in Civic, or T-Glass? Or so can you give us an update, if it's not too silly a question?
It's not a silly question at all. I'm waiting to get that finalised, I think, is fair to say. There's no issue with it, but of course we need to look at our entire asset base. Yeah. Conversations will have been happening with the team that Sarah probably could have updated on, but I think I just want to see the final proposals for that before signing off. What we do know is that we'll try and have that team all in one place.
Okay, that's it. Does anyone else have any questions or they want to bring forward? Well, thank you, Councillor Daniels and Dave, for listening to all our questions and give us an update. Before we ask you to leave, I will ask our colleagues from Bronavon if they want to come in and ask any brief questions of our officers, or are you satisfied with what you've heard?
No, it's okay for me. I think it's very similar to what we're doing in housing, in that we're working with other services and, well, specifically looking at what we've got in our communities and what we need to improve and what the strengths are. So it seems very, very similar to what we've been working on within Bronavon, but also with the Health Board and the Integrated Wellbeing Network. So, yeah, it seems to be the way forward.
I agree with Claire, and I manage support services, housing related support services. So, you know, we do get to see what the needs are with vulnerable client groups. So, yeah, thank you for having us here today.
It's no problem. You're more than welcome.
we've made lots of notes to take away.
Okay. Do either of you want to come in and do a summary before we ask you to leave, please?
Not necessarily a summary. I mean, it's just to thank the Scrutiny Committee for inviting us to and picking this as a subject to scrutinise, really, because I'm a firm believer in scrutiny. You know, I do miss it myself, actually, particularly this one. And I'm confident, having been through the reablement scrutiny late last year, and this scrutiny, that we will end up with a more well-rounded policy at the end of the day. So, it's just to thank everyone for their questions, which I'm frequently pleasantly impressed by the quality and the depth of the questions that we've had. I think this is probably one of the most effective setups of scrutiny that I think I've seen in the years that I've been on the council, and I don't mean that in any kind of glib way. I think that we are a very effective scrutiny committee at the moment, so I'm just very pleased that you've picked this subject to take a look at. Thank you.
Thank you. There was one question. As Bronavon social landlords are involved in this sort of thing, other organisations like United Welsh, another housing association, mainly north as well and possibly Blaenau-Gwent, are we going to involve them with it, with what we're hoping to, process out to the community? So I like to think that we could get involved with that sort of a housing association as well. Okay.
Yeah, just to come back on that, because I think it's a really important point. With this particular proposal, yes, as part of that Commons Plan engagement, we will share with Housing Association colleagues. I'm conscious Bronavon are here today because there's a particular interest there because of the nature of some of the work that we do and the number of our customers who would be living in Bronavon properties, which is particularly high. In terms of that wider communities approach and communities agenda, we operate something called the Community Resilience Group. It's part of the governance structures we're setting up linked into community wellbeing strategy. That feeds directly into the strategic housing partnership. So the housing associations are represented at a director level on that community group. And we have, within our terms of reference as a group, committed to working to look at removing duplication in terms of provision across the board and embedding a community first, without wanting to coin a phrase, community first approach to how we deliver support activities. So all of the housing associations that form part of that group are represented there.
Thank you. I'm glad to know that. Okay, so if you're free to escape if you want to. Okay, well, thank you for all you've done and answering our questions with vigour.
Thank you all.
There's usually a system. Thank you.
Members online, we're just going to take a 2-minute pause a second for members in the chamber. Bear with us online. Thank you, Chair. So if I can draw members' attention to the scrutiny activity following your questioning of the front door to adult services report. The key question is, how will the redesign of the front door to adult services deliver a more effective and efficient service to our residents? In answering this question, members are invited to specifically consider the 3 questions presented within the report, which were, do members accept the rationale for the new service? So if we can start with that one, I think at the time when you posed that question, you did all agree that you were satisfied with that rationale. Thank you. Moving on to the second question, it was, are members comfortable that the proposed service model will deliver effective and efficient outcomes for our residents? Again, Councillor Clarkson and the rest of the committee in person felt that you were comfortable with the proposed service models. Did you want to make any specific recommendations on the proposals before we move forward with any further discussions?
Anyone want to come in? Lucy? Jane?
I think I said
Linda, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I'm wondering whether this is a subject that we need to return to when the data is gathered and bring it back to scrutiny, say 12 months down the line, so that we can have another look at it and see how well things are going.
Yeah. As I said, it's early days yet. It's not going to start until
No.
April. So how are we going to measure the effectiveness? So yes, I would support that we come back to this and reconvene perhaps in a 12 months' time.
It may be
And
member
interact,
seminar,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
you know, in some way we re-scrutinise.
Like Jane.
So can I just confirm, do you mean 12 months from when it starts or 12 months from now?
When it starts.
When it starts. Rose, do you want to come in?
Sorry,
Or
Chair, can I
Steve?
just come in quickly? So obviously just to confirm that's within your gift to request any reports back that you want. So rather than a recommendation, I'll put that in the summary comments at the end. But just to add on further to Councillor Clarkson's point, obviously this is going through a consultation and engagement exercise now. So I didn't know whether you wanted to think, and not as a recommendation, but more as within the commentary, whether there's any key changes to the proposal that perhaps you get a briefing note from the exec member if anything arises out of those consultations or engagements, that perhaps
I think so.
Just a briefing note from the exec member updating you on any changes that they may find.
Yeah.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay. There.
So unless there's any further recommendations on the proposal.
Yes, Chair. I have had my hand up.
Sorry, Rose.
Yeah. I think there is a need to communicate this effectively. Our comms team needs to, as the exec member said, it's not just our communities, it's the geographical communities, it's the groups that are there, the MS groups, and all the other health groups. So it's about bringing everybody and making everybody aware. So the communication strategy needs to be pretty strong, I think.
Yeah, totally agree, because I think I suggested coming to do presentations to to other groups' forums. So I think this is critical for this to succeed, that people know where they can get the answers to their questions. Anybody else want to come in? No? Okay.
Yeah.
Steve?
Can I change just to say I agree we need to have a progress report once it starts implementing, but we must be careful, because the question was asked, that where we do our comms, we're reaching everybody, like Rosa said, but not all through digital platforms.
No.
But to make sure that it covers the people who are not on the digital platforms. That's very important for that bit.
Yeah, this is what I brought it up with Councillor Daniel. So totally endorse what you're saying. I think that's echoed by the members in the chamber as well. Beck?
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, in terms of overall recommendations, I only had a note of that one that Councillor Seaborn has just raised with regards to the communication campaign. And I did just note down the one action point. Dave did say that he would get back to Councillor Williams on the number of capacity builder posts on it. He thought it was 6, but he'd confirm that. So I'll send that to the committee as soon as I have it. But I have nothing further, Chair, to add.
Could I just make something that we can maybe just talk around a little bit and see whether we'd agree that it could be an idea as a recommendation? They've had working groups with partners, etc., regarding the setup and the implementation sort of side of things. Maybe that would be something that could be considered to evaluate sort of during the sort of first year, 18 months, to have meetings with partners, carers, maybe invite some service users, third party, to evaluate from that perspective on a sort of group basis how things have been going with the change.
Sorry, Linda, just trying to understand, how is that different from the general point that we were making about communication? I'm not quite understanding what you're getting at, sorry.
Well, communications is about letting people know about the change and how they can access the service. I'm thinking more about some sort of focus on how service users and partners and other organisations are finding their sort of experience of accessing the service in a different way, so that they can feed into the ongoing evaluation during this crucial initial setup phase You know, carers could be invited. TVA are going to be involved. I've noticed today that they've advertised a post for a community engagement and data officer, which is quite a new post for them. So you know, this could be useful feedback from the other side of service users as to how this is actually progressing, and maybe any suggestions that they've got.
I also noticed that we're still waiting to go communication with the unpaid carers. So it'd be nice to have a little bit of an update on the communications and how they are feeling the new system will either help or hinder them as the unpaid carers, because they are an important sector in our community.
So, I'll just add that as a note in the commentary rather than that being a recommendation.
Anybody else want to come with any recommendations or any observations for comments to be made before we close? We all happy with everything?
There was something on consent and data sharing that Dave mentioned on question page 20, on page 25 question on the fourth page.
Yeah, with the police.
25.
Yeah.
So whether or not there's a bit of information or question around data sharing and consent, I don't know.
Could you repeat that for clarity? We're breaking up a little bit, Rose.
Yeah, sorry. Question 25. There was a comment about consent and data sharing with the police, and there needed to be a bit of more police engagement.
I think that's sort of across the board as well, because for any adult there needs to be consent before a referral is made. For children, not necessary, but that's something that isn't always known. And maybe there is a little bit of an issue there, Rose, you right?
I think so.
It may be an observation and not a recommendation.
Yeah.
So obviously Dave did come in and explain that there was more work to be done on that. So they've obviously identified that as an issue, and they are working towards achieving that.
So we'll do that as an observation. Steve, do you want to come in, please?
Yeah, the question I want to ask, how this will impact on our county plan, and how we move forward to collect that data on regular intervals, because the county plan, it has to be, well, I think I remember him saying it's got to be incorporated within the county plan anyway. But I
think it is. That's where it's coming from.
Yeah, but it's how it's incorporated and what strands it's going through, because it won't just be in one particular aspect. It'll cut quite a few parts of it. So it's knowing where and when it goes.
Steve, this is a question or a recommendation, but we take on board what you said and obviously make it down as an observation or a concern.
But I'm just thinking it will have an impact through the recommendations and the questions we've asked. So.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Jane.
Sorry, just following up from what Steve said, and I might not be incorrect. I might not be correct, because obviously I haven't read it all again today. But isn't that covered in the appendix? How it aligns with the county plan and the corporate plan? Yeah, the wellbeing objectives. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we also with what recommendations was very few, but the observations we have. So, with a view to that, we need to consider our item for our next meeting. So, Beth, can you take us through what we've got left on our visioning, please?
Thank you, members. So, if I can draw your attention to the appendix to this item, where it sets out the basket of items that you've selected at the visioning meeting, and also any items coming up on the exec forward plan and any audit referrals. At the time of writing this report, there were no audit referrals relevant to this specific committee. In terms of what on the exec forward plan that is coming up, you have the annual social care director's report to council. That isn't something that would come through scrutiny, so you'll be receiving that at council. And then obviously the community wellbeing strategy, which you have received twice, as Dave Leach referred to during the meeting. So in terms of what was in the basket of items, the item that you selected for the February meeting is child protection, the CIW rapid review. So just to remind members, This is a review that CIW have done with regards to the numbers of children being put on and off the Child Protection Register and whether we're meeting our obligations in terms of that. So are members satisfied? This will be your first sort of children's services item that you'll be looking at within you. So are members still happy that that's the item? Yeah.
Yes, I think it's an important one to take forward. Okay.
Yeah, can I offer my apologies? I have a day with the Torfaen Leisure Trust Board on that day, so I won't be in attendance. My apologies.
Okay, that's noted. Thanks, Rose. So, Agenda 7 is the date of the next meeting, which I think is going to be Thursday, the 29th of February at 10 o'clock. So thank you, everyone, for your attendance, both online and in the chamber, for your contributions. I'm now going to close the meeting and hope you all have a nice afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks.